To observe as the Board of Education conducts its official business, I want to take a moment to highlight Board Policy 2310, which states persons who willfully interrupt, disrupt, or cause disturbances at an official meeting may be directed to leave by the presiding officer. Members of the audience should show respect for any speaker by refraining from loud comments or other disruptions. Disruptions by any person or persons of a public meeting will be subject to action in accordance with General Statute 143-318.11. We have a quorum, and we will now please join in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance.
Of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all very much. Before we begin today, we had an unexpected loss in our Wake County community, specifically our Millbrook High School community, and that is the unexpected loss of Principal Dana King, who passed over the weekend. If you will all join me in a moment of silence. Thank you all very much. We'll begin with Superintendent Moore's comments.
So many of us remain shocked and deeply saddened by the sudden passing of our longtime colleague and friend, Dana King. With her sense of humor and fierce advocacy for her colleagues and students, Dana has made a lasting impact on thousands of people since she joined our district as an English teacher at Sanderson High School in 1986. She served as principal at East Millbrook for 4 years before beginning her tenure at Millbrook in 2003. Her students and staff just last week paid a heartfelt tribute to her as she prepared to retire later this month. Dana had the unique ability to make a large magnet high school feel small and personal. She cared for one student at a time, often pulling students into her office who needed a listening ear, then helping them formulate a plan for success. She also had the ability to put a smile on anyone's face, regardless of the circumstances. She was well known for bringing levity and, in turn, some perspective to the most challenging of situations. Our hearts are with the Millbrook community and with Dana's family, her husband Rick, her daughters Katie and Jenny, and her 3 grandchildren as they grieve this tragic loss. Know that her memory and legacy will live on in all the lives she touched during her 42 years as an educator. Congratulations are in order to the 6 school athletic directors and 1 athletic trainer who received awards yesterday from the North Carolina Athletic Directors Association. Colin Fegley, the athletic director at Green Level High, was named the state's Athletic Director of the Year. He has served as an athletic director in our district for 8 years, starting at Green Hope High before being named Green Level's first athletic director when the school opened in 2019. Eric Hall, the head athletic trainer at Cary High, was named the State Athletic Trainer of the Year. Mr. Hall graduated from Cary High in 1993 and returned to his alma mater in 2006 after 6 years as the head trainer at Southeast Raleigh High. Jeff Dunbar, athletic trainer at Garner High, and Mike Joyner, the recently retired athletic director at Wake Forest High, each received a Brave Heart Award for continuing to perform their duties amid personal hardship. Mr. Dunbar continued to serve the Garner community while spending countless hours with his family in the hospital as his son battled an illness. And Mr. Joyner rarely missed work, even as he underwent chemotherapy treatments for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Finally, Crystal Massenberg of South Garner High Travis Cease of Athens Drive High, and Jason Adams of Pine Hollow Middle each were recognized as Athletic Directors of Excellence for significant contributions in the field of athletics within their state, region, and nation. It is well documented that the benefits of student athletic participation extend well beyond the playing field. These awards are a reminder that the state of athletics in Wake County is strong thanks in large part to dedicated leadership. Next, I would like to congratulate Apex Friendship Principal Matt White for receiving the Ralph Kimmel Award last week from the North Carolina Principals and Assistant Principals Association. The award is given annually to a retired educator who has made a lasting contribution to the profession and the association. While Mr. White has not yet retired, he has announced his retirement and plans to step down at the end of the school year. Mr. White has 39 years as an educator, 23 of those in Wake County. He served as principal of East Cary Middle, Salem Middle, and Apex High before becoming Apex Friendship's first principal when that school opened in 2015. He was named WCPSS Principal of the Year in 2008. And Mr. White's leadership and dedication extends beyond his principal duties. He has served as president of the State Principal and Assistant Principals Association in 2014-15 and continues to serve on that organization's board. Thank you, Mr. White, for your many years of effective leadership in our district, across the state, and congratulations on this well-deserved recognition. Finally, this is Assistant Principal Appreciation Week, and I want to join our students, parents, and staff members in expressing my gratitude for the countless ways assistant principals keep our schools running smoothly. As a former assistant principal, I know that it is a challenge to juggle the many responsibilities that come with the job. Assistant principals have a hand in nearly every aspect of campus operations, whether it's facilitating transportation, looking at other student services, supporting classroom instruction, other duties as assigned. Often that work happens behind the scenes, so it is fitting to take this time to let our assistant principals know how invaluable they are to the success of our students. I hope that we will all take the time to thank an AP this week. That concludes my comments.
Thank you, Superintendent Moore. On May 25th, members of the Apex High School community, past and present, gathered together along with the sisters and cousins of Kevin E. Todd to commemorate him and name the field in his honor. Coach Todd had many people who came to see him, to see this honor bestowed for him in his honor. Past principals, assistant principals, no matter how short their time at Apex High was, past athletic directors, coaches from other schools, and one of his first players who was on his team when he coached at North Garter Middle School. In addition to naming of the field, there's also a rock with a beautiful plaque inside to memorialize Coach Todd and what he meant to the community. I'd like to congratulate the Spice Girls of Apex High School for winning the North Carolina Junior Chef Competition. Always fun to see what our CTE kids can do. And speaking of that, Student Hands-On Experience Day, or SHED, and I know Dr. Martin will talk on this as well, puts our students in with members of the business community for construction. Holly Springs High School and Heritage High School were named some of the winners. We had Cary High, Leesville High, and other schools participating. Alumni had come back to help coach teams, and the most incredible thing was the job board, where 12 students by the end of the 3 days, walked off of that site with a job for when they graduate high school. And that concludes my comments. Vice Chair Haggerty is away at a conference, so we will start with Ms. Kushner.
Thank you, Chair Mahaffey, and it certainly has been, last week was so inspiring to be with Ms. King and her family and her community. And I'm sorry, Ms. Cash, for the loss of your dear friend, and to all of us to our principal community for the loss of their colleague. It was a day of celebration, and it should have continued for so long. So my heart just goes out to everyone in the King family. And then Wednesday, I was with Mr. Hegarty and Superintendent Moore at Green Hope High School, where we had another emotional day of reweaving our community. It was such a magnificent day honoring Captain Brian Smith and Mr. Eric Hall, who at a cheer conference in February saved the life of a man who had collapsed. Robert Gresham Sr. was visiting from Charlotte and was watching his granddaughter in a cheer tournament and collapsed. And his son gave the emotional description of these two men, Captain Brian Smith and our Cary High athletic director, athletic trainer, Eric Hall, coming to his aid. And I appreciate the Green Hope community and the Cary High community coming forward to celebrate those two men. And it felt like a moment of truly reweaving our communities together after this such long time of being broken apart. I needed that. I will see for myself. I needed that moment to feel things were coming together, and the need for us coming together in school communities. And Ms. King's celebration was that too. And so we need our school communities to be elevated for what they are. Ms. Carter has spoken about this with her loss this last year. We've had so much loss that we need to take on. I told Ms. Cash we need to take on Ms. King's legacy and live her legacy every day, remembering her. That's what we need to do. So I'll charge us all with that. Ms. Carter also has inspired me about musicals. I was at Martin for Shrek Jr., which was great fun to watch all these kids in their green paint and wonderful storytell costumes. It was so I encourage everyone to check out a musical. I think Enlo's doing Pippin and Broughton is doing Chicago. So lots of great talent in Wake County schools. Also, thanks to the Office of Equity Affairs for hosting the Young Women's Summit this last weekend. Some wonderful conversations Ms. Johnson-Hostler and I had with these brilliant young women who are ready to take on the world, and also to Dr. Rangel for being part of the Hispanic Professionals Education Summit, which brought together students from not only Wake County, from across the state, to encourage excellence in education. We also celebrate our National Board Certified Teachers. What a wonderful event, because we lead the nation in this gold standard of teaching. We have the best teachers in the entire country, and Wake County, I appreciate the staff and schools supporting those wonderful teachers as they spread their brilliance and work hard during a pandemic to renew or get board certified. And also Carroll Middle Schools welcome their new principal, Ms. Zarzecki, with a true leadership night where students were doing student-led conferences and leading their families and their parents through the school. And again, it was a celebration of being back in that school community. So it's been a wonderful, emotional 2 weeks. Thank you, Ms. Mahaffey.
Thank you, Ms. Kushner. Dr. Martin.
Thank you. Echo a lot of those congratulations. I, too, want to start with remembering Dana King. I don't remember exactly when I first met her, but she was one of the first principals I met who was not a principal at one of my children's schools. I believe it was working on some equity committees that I was working on before I became a board member, and that was Dana. And I have a hard. I'm not likely to call her Principal King or Miss King because she was that person, and she cared about every child, not just every child of her school, but of this district. She firmly believed in the magnet program, and wanted to see that succeed. She touched thousands of lives. I'm very sorry that I was not able to go to her retirement reception, and now she's not with us. But may her legacy live on. As Ms. Kushner noted, it's a charge to all of us. As you noted, Ms. Chair Mahaffey, 2 weeks ago I was in a more normal element for me. I was leaving my normal element and going to our joint meeting with the commissioners. We had a good meeting with our commissioners, great to continue those partnerships, but I spent the day with folks at the shed competition. Just huge congratulations to Kevin Kimberly, the CTE, the construction teacher at Cary High School, who had this idea, I don't remember how many years ago, of initiating this competition where students would build sheds. The sheds get auctioned off. It's a competition. You start with a pile of lumber, and at the end of the competition, there are sheds that can be sold, and they're really high-quality work. I've interacted with it as long as I can. Real super hats off to the Holly Springs team, who, one of their two teams, they initiated two teams, but they had the first, as far as I know, it's the first all-women's team, and had a great chance to talk with some of the young women. One in particular stuck out because she was interested in going on toward a medical career, likely into surgery. And of course, you all know that I'm going to champion that like crazy because the skills you learn building with your hands are so related to science and frankly to medicine. We are constructions, and to see the combination of that kind of CTE hands-on experience with very high-level academic performance was fantastic. In particular, hats off to the all-women's team. When I participate, I always ask Mr. Kimberly to, put me where needed. And I got to work with a group who, frankly, had very little experience coming into the competition. Helped keep that gang, in the running day one. And it was really fascinating and just such a reminder of the importance of this kind of hands-on learning, because here were kids who at the beginning of the day were still awkward with the tools, with measurements, with how you lay stuff out. And I'll tell you what, by the end of the day, in just one day, the level of improvement was so obvious. It is so different to see active hands-on learning than just sitting there talking about it in a classroom. So hats off to everybody involved in that process. It's such a great thing. We now have a couple other competitions going on. The next one coming up is going to be with electrical wiring. So again, a number of these things are happening. We've had them in the past for architectural design. So the business community gets to actually see the product of our CTE kids, and many of them get jobs. So keep it up. Great work. I do have a BAC meeting for District 5 coming up this Thursday evening, 6:30 at Dillard Drive Middle School. We'll be doing some of the work, getting community input on the strategic plan. I want to give us the brief update on where we are in terms of COVID data. Data reporting in the school system has changed, so it's a little bit difficult to sort of give numbers that are meaningfully comparative. But our Wake County numbers are currently at 52 cases in a week per 100,000 population. That is up from the low of about 2 weeks ago when we got down to the low of about 42 cases per 100,000 population. So the cases are slightly rising again. It's not clear whether this is the really uptick before BA2 or whether this is a bump on the way down. But care needs to be taken. Those numbers are based on comparing our Wake County Schools numbers with the county numbers. I would have to estimate the numbers are probably, the formal reported numbers are probably 30 to 50% low based on the amount of home testing that is done. From the statewide data, if we look at the disaggregated numbers, for the first time in quite a long time, really almost in a year, the school-age population is now dipping below the rest of the county population. The 5 to 9-year-olds are at 40 cases per 100,000. These are weekly cases. The 10 to 14-year-olds are at 29 per 100,000 population. The 15 to 17-year-olds are about 40 cases per 100,000. Those are also, however, on the verge of turning up. Right now, the highest cases, the highest infection rate in Wake County are the 24 to 49-year-olds, which are up 8% from last week. That's with reported cases. That number is actually will be significantly higher because each week's reporting is a little bit low. So the 24 to 49-year-olds are up to 62 cases per 100,000 population. So things are trending, unfortunately, not in the right direction right now. Finally, in the last week or two, we've been hearing a lot of new talk about the state's consideration of a new way to pay teachers and educators in general. And sadly, with that conversation, the old trope gets marched out of this myth that educators are afraid of change. The folks from Best NC, cited in the paper, educators are just afraid of change. And I'll tell you what, to march that trope out again now is embarrassing. Teachers and educators in the last couple of years have changed like crazy, met needs throughout a pandemic in ways that nobody thought possible before. None of us knew what to do before. And as it was some committee meeting, somebody noted, and I lived that experience as well. Some of us in education hear people talking about, all the binging on Netflix or whatever during the pandemic. I can tell you, not a single educator was sitting there binging on anything because our work went up. Working hybrid, working remote, the new forms of instruction. You know what? We dealt with change. Did we solve every problem? No. Did we keep it from being a whole lot worse? You bet. Educators are not afraid of change. When they talk about the afraid of change in this new education or funding profile for educators, they again are marching out the tropes of how testing and assessment and accountability metrics are what we need, and we need to pay people based on these accountability metrics. Well, let me tell you, folks, if standardized testing and accountability metrics would magically improve teaching, we would have world-class education everywhere in this country. But you know what? Ever since No Child Left Behind, we discovered that standardized testing and those kind of spreadsheet accountability measures, while they may have some place, they really do not tell us about quality education. And they're not going to just reform things. So I think I know who is actually afraid of change. I think it's those policymakers. And many of these alleged business reformers are afraid of change. Change that will actually work is to trust and pay educators as the professionals that they are. You know what? It worked in Finland. Finland had some of the same challenges that we have. And they looked at the situation and they said, what do we need to do? They said, we need to actually treat our educators like professionals, pay them like professionals. And you know what happened? Finland went and became the top in the world in terms of education. So whenever you hear this trope of educators are afraid of change, hogwash. The folks afraid of change are those who are trying to keep this crazy mythology going on that somehow we can do it cheaper, somehow we can do it with standardized testings, somehow teachers are afraid of being accountable. Hogwash. Let's lose our fear to recognize, treat, and pay educators as the professionals that they are. Thank you.
Ms. Scott.
Thank you. I want to start by echoing the sentiments of my colleagues and just express my prayers to everyone who knew and loved Dana King. Such a tragic loss, but my goodness, her legacy is just an infinite wake of positive, of the ways to use your voice, your strength, and your knowledge and education. I just think of the number of people she served, and I was actually speaking with someone and talked about something that Dana King had done. I mean, just a few weeks ago, I said, Dana King did, and so she will always and forever. Her legacy will absolutely live on. As Ms. Kushner and Dr. Martin and Chair Mahaffey have pointed out, it's been a very busy time, but full of a lot of joy. So in these moments of loss, there certainly has been so much to celebrate as well. I appreciated the opportunity to go to East Wake High School, where they had a presentation about the many challenges of their school, but the many positive things of their school. And I was thankful that Douglas Condon as well from our maintenance and operations was able to attend. It was also a really great opportunity because they had both a teacher panel and a student panel. And while as board members we have lots of opportunities to meet teachers and see them in various capacities, it isn't that often, at least for me, that I've had like a panel, like a question and answer type opportunity with teachers or students especially. And those are the voices that we really need to hear from. We hear from parents, and that's absolutely important. But I think it's also the opportunities to have to talk to people who are inside those buildings every day is a positive one. And I hope, I've mentioned this before, I'm going to put a plug for that again, but maybe we can find a way to incorporate student voice into our board advisory councils or have some sort of input that we can hear from on a regular basis. The Wendell Elementary Science Fair returned. They actually had not had their science fair for a few years, even prior to COVID, so it was great to see that come back and to see the students, the projects, amazing projects. We have such talented kiddos and talented teachers and dedicated parents who helped put on this great event. So it was, I appreciate and thank them again for the opportunity to judge the projects and congratulate those winners. And speaking of things that had not happened for a while, as you probably are all aware, we had MPA. So the musical performance assessment for groups, our choirs, orchestras, and bands have been participating in these, where they are, if you're not familiar, if you were in band 1,000 years ago like I was, it's contest. So they go and perform in front of judges who provide feedback and then give them ratings. And I wanted to just extend to our music directors who maybe you didn't get to go back this year because your numbers did drop, or it is hard to do that again, to return to participating in these types of events, because it is not an easy task to plan, to prepare your students, and especially if you've lost instrumentation. I was thinking about our future farmers, all of these sort of co-curricular groups that go out and participate in different activities, and it's been difficult to get that going again. But what I want to say to those teachers and leaders is that maybe MPA didn't happen this year, but the experience that your students have in your classroom each and every day is what they'll take with them. And that's what you have been doing, and that has never been lost with your students. Whether they are in school or not, the connections they make in your classroom, virtual classroom, but especially in person, is something that they'll take with them. So hang in there, and you'll get back to those contests very soon, because I think children are just going to keep, they're going to keep wanting to participate in these types of activities that truly, as Ms. Kushner said, bring us together. Thank you.
Ms. Waters.
Thank you, Chair Mahaffey. I also would like to join in offering prayers and support to the King family, the Millbrook community, and all those who loved and knew her. As a Millbrook graduate and having gone back later in life to Millbrook, the loss is very personal, I think, to everyone here, so lots of prayers. In the 3 weeks since I have been on the board, it has been quite a journey, and I'm very grateful. Having been a student, an employee, a parent in the district, and now a board member, it is really amazing to see all the behind-the-scenes work that goes into keeping the district operating and our students receiving the great education that they do. So thank you to all of my colleagues and all of the staff who have done such a great job with the onboarding and explaining and answering many questions that I've had. So that's been wonderful. And in my first 24 hours on the board, I had the wonderful opportunity, thanks to Ms. Johnson-Hostler, to visit my first school, which was Mary Phillips, a school that I was only familiar with in name. And so actually going there was what a beautiful experience. And I think this is a school that is very unsung. The energy there was so positive and so encouraging. And they were hosting a lunch and learn through the North Carolina Transit Workers Association, exposing the students to different career options, and the students were so engaged, asked wonderful questions, and just were so attentive. I was thinking I wish I had been at that point at that age in my own life, but to see them was wonderful. So Mary Phillips is just an amazing school, and if you've not experienced the environment there, it's a very special place. And also over Ms. Kushner, I had a chance to step over into Carroll, where I have a student, and so the student-led conferences were really amazing. And the special thing about Carroll, and every school is very special, the special thing about Carroll for me is just how positive the environment is. I think they've used every inch, every wall, every staircase to be a place for encouragement and affirmation, so that our students feel good about themselves and feel good about being in the environment. So it was a great opportunity to meet teachers and to be able to thank them in person for all the work that they've done. And being back in the building was really great to connect with my sixth grader and to see his world and actually be there. So very glad to have our new principal at Carroll. And then had a meeting at the Southeast Raleigh YMCA, which, as you know, is connected to Southeast Raleigh Elementary. And so I was like, I can't be this close and not actually go to the school. And so our meeting host made opportunity for me to go over. And as we celebrate all the workers in our district, I would like to say our frontline staff, our receptionists, they do a great job. So Miss Data, who is over at Southeast, who sits in a very open, glassed-in space, wonderful smile and so welcoming. So I really enjoyed going over and meeting Miss Finner in an impromptu meeting. They were so kind and so sweet. And so I didn't get a chance to tour the school, but to see all the young learners walking around was really, really special to me. And on Sunday, went to Enloe, and wow, Enloe is doing amazing things. It was really just the perfect blending of so many families, so many students with so many interests. I met football players, I met students in band, I met students in the performing arts, and so many students coming in as incoming freshmen. It was just lovely to be able to see a school that represents our community and has a place for everyone. And so Principal Jordan does a great job, and the students really had such a strong impact on me at that event, because they really took charge and were very able to answer questions and guide me along. Even one of their lead marshals, she pulled me over and said, come on, you're going on this tour with me. And so I appreciated that confidence again, seeing how our students are demonstrating those leadership skills and being able to be the voice of our future is really great. And then also joining in some of the work with the Community Equity Leadership Team. So it's been a great 3 weeks, and I'm looking forward to lots more to come. So thank you.
Ms. Carter.
Thank you, and I too share condolences about Dana King to all those who knew her, anyone that was touched by her. Maybe she didn't even realize it. And I just want to send the condolences to everyone there. Yesterday was a school librarian day, so I did want to mention that. And thank all of our librarians, because this month is also School Library Month, which is a very important part of our schools, but also our the other side, the public libraries outside of our schools, very important in our communities. Another awareness month that touches me personally a lot is Parkinson's disease awareness month. And I just want to take a moment, please indulge me a little bit, because I do know that, folks who work for our school system or families who have students in our system have been touched in some shape or fashion, whether you yourself have Parkinson's disease or you have a family member or friend. My dad had Parkinson's, and my mother has Parkinson's disease. And I just want to say to anyone who's listening, there is lots of hope. There's lots of resources out there. It is a very challenging disease. But there are lots of resources in our community. I know our family, the UNC Parkinson's Center for Excellence was very helpful to us, but the Parkinson's Foundation provides free support and lots of information. So just reach out and do not give up is what I'll walk away with that for. But switching gears a little bit, I want to thank all the APs. I know that's been touched on already, but just knowing how much of an impact they can have not only on our students, our families, but staff, because I know when I worked in the school system, APs were often there and the ones needed not only in great times of celebration, but also when we needed support, perhaps. So I just wanted to thank all of them for all they do. I did have the opportunity to attend another United Artists in Schools event, and this one was at Adams Elementary. The number drummer, I think I'm saying that right. I'm probably messing my M and B's. But it was just fantastic the way he merged math and how it connects to music, and how, guys, you don't need to have an instrument in your home. You can still be playing music, bringing in multiplication, fractions, and seeing the students just really going at it with drumsticks, and my personal favorite is cowbells, and the trash can lids, and it was just a great event, and just very important to continue all of those, and there's so many. I have another one coming up, I think, later this month. I think it's Roger Day, which I remember for quite some time. I think have some of his songs still memorized from my children when he was around. So also enjoyed the shed of it as well. The day I went, it was raining, and I was like, of course, but it was actually really helped in their work experience, because when you're working outside, the job goes on, unless, of course, there's tornado or thunder, lightning. But, if it's raining, they have to continue, and those students were continuing. They were walking through that mud. They were hauling the shingles up. They were, and it was a great event. Got to talk to the OSHA, I called him the OSHA guy, because he kind of got upset because I had the Navy Junior ROTC on, and he was not a Navy man. But we worked that out. But it was just great to see how he told me a lot of history and how long he's been involved, and just a huge amount of community support. And the jobs were wonderful, because I just think, every student has a little bit different path, and anything we can do to encourage those different paths and help them on whatever their journey is a wonderful thing. And congratulations, too, about the new and renewed nationally board certified teachers. That, too, was a great event, especially considering everything else that's been going on, to be able to work through that process, finish that, and congratulations to all those teachers. And right after that event, I was lucky enough to attend my first lacrosse game. Never been to one of those. I did that because there was one going on. I was kind of shocked because it had been the weather and a lot of things postponed, but the women's lacrosse at Cary High was still going on, so I was able to catch that. And, of course, a musical. I love the musicals. And I went Friday, which was appropriate because it was Freaky Friday at Green Hope High School. And it was just another magnificent event. The cast, the crew, the orchestra pit, the director team. And I have to say, it was not only the singing and the music, but there were some serious jump rope skills. I'll just leave it there. That occurred. But it was just, again, I love it. I have another one. I think it's East Cary Middle School is coming up later this month, and it's Shrek Junior, I believe, as well. But looking forward to that. And last week was the District 9 back meeting. And I want to thank Ms. Gaddis for always helping, because we are doing virtual the rest of this school year. And she helped with all of that. And Mr. Huffstetler and his team for helping ensure the materials, the presentation was translated, and having an interpreter on the call. I really appreciate all of that help. And Mr. Nieder and Dr. Matillo, who are over there, I want to thank you all for coming. They did a great presentation on all of our staff challenges, our vacancies, the different steps that have been taken with compensation, bonuses, and also the wide variety of recruiting processes that are going on and ongoing. And even we're able to celebrate some early, I think I'm going to say this right, early contracts, is that how, okay, thank you, Dr. Patilla, that have been signed. So it was great to hear. And the next back meeting for District 9 is on April 27th at 6 p.m., and again, will be virtual, and this will be the strategic plan input. So I encourage folks to sign up and please come, because we really want to hear as many from as many folks as possible and many voices. So thank you.
Ms. Cash.
So Dana King was probably one of my closest friends. So I probably emotionally won't say a lot tonight, but I can say that I think most of Millbrook will say that about Dana King being a really close friend, because Millbrook High School is a community, and you know as well as anybody. I did walks around Millbrook yesterday, and we coaches and I spent a lot of time out in the gymnasium and the hallways. And, I stood in front of her room for a while, and I don't think I've seen her room without a light in it before. But we did talk about the trouble we would get into. We did talk about Kathy Moore and how fun it was to break the rules, but she would always say to me, I'll tell Kathy, she'll be fine. And should I tell her before we do it or after? And I'd say I'd leave that up to you, Dana, because you know Kathy better than anybody, and Kathy knew her well. I don't think we would always tell our area superintendents what we were doing, because it was easier just to let that go. But I remember the first time I met Dana King. It was when she was made the East Millbrook principal, and I was still I was on the Board of Education in the 90s, and somebody called me, and it was getting dark out, and they said East Millbrook is burning down, and I said okay. So I went over there, and Dana King was there, and it was kind of dark, and her building was burning down. She hadn't been a principal very long, and here comes this lady out of the flames, kind of walking out towards me, and I said, she must be a superhero. And that's the first time I met Dana King, and well, she is a superhero. So I'm going to think more about the things that that I can talk about later. I am so happy that we had a retirement thing on earlier this week. Ms. Moore, you did a beautiful job of telling all the things that you two had done together for years and years and years. And the area superintendents that had her told a little bit of her life, a little bit at a time, and covered all the things that she had done in her career. It was a story well told. Her staff was there, her two daughters and their families and little grandkids running around, and her husband, Rick, all looking forward to the next chapter of their life. And she was too. She was excited. All of our principals have been through a lot in the last couple years, and they have persevered and been exhausted, but always smiling. So I don't think that anybody will drive by Millbrook High School ever and not see Dana King standing somewhere as they remembered her on the property. And there's a beautiful tribute that was given to her that day, made by the shop people, that will stand out in front, that just shows what a light she is in the community. And even though I know her light wasn't on in her office that day that I looked at it, I just know that her light goes on forever. But I'll share more as I think more about it and emotionally more prepared. But thank you.
Ms. Johnson-Hustler.
Thank you. I felt horrible all last week because I had loss in my family and missed her tribute. So needless to say, I was at a family funeral, and Miss Mahaffey called to tell me. I think many of you know my daughter goes to Millbrook, and what you may not know is Millbrook was our first family. When we moved here in the end of 1999, my husband's first school was Millbrook. So his first boss in Wake County was Dana King, and I mean, you explained it well. It's a community. And even once my husband left Millbrook and my daughter was still at Millbrook, I have to tell the story. Miss Cash is like a lifelong Wildcat, just want y'all to know. Miss King is the chief Wildcat. This is the lifelong Wildcat. And so so Miss Cash was always at events at Millbrook during our tenure. And my husband has been gone from Millbrook for a while as a coach. And he still had keys to Millbrook. Still does. We had this conversation as a part of our family processing what it means to lose someone that is the first person he worked for in this district and my daughter's current principal. So, I mean, was a part of our family, and that's also how she treated us and treated me prior to becoming a board member. And I think you all have gathered she also had a sense of humor. So she was like, well, you're a school board member now, but you're still Bobby's wife. And it's like, true. And we also acknowledge that Ms. Cash is her consummate board member forever. But I have to tell you, at the last homecoming before COVID with my best friend, Ms. Cash's granddaughter, we were all decked out in our Millbrook gear, and Ms. King comes across the loudspeaker to give her announcement, and she says, and Mr. Hostler still has keys. This is still your home. We welcome you back any day. And I was floored. I was like, we're at a homecoming football game. She was like, yes, I'm offering Mr. Hostler his job back. And I just think it's important that, I mean, it's funny and it's a thing that I remember because it's important to note that she lived such a long legacy, but talk about a rule breaker. Like, she offered a job over an intercom. So that will forever be funny to our family. And my daughter was super embarrassed because we have a last name like Hostler. So, of course, people are like, is that your dad? And that went on for a couple of weeks. Like, your dad got offered a job by the principal. So I think it's important that you know that not only did she have a sense of humor, but truly, I don't think that there is anybody who's touched the soil at Millbrook who won't remember her legacy, her humor. Even after she was struggling to walk, she came to that football game, and I felt sorry for the football players. Like, she sat on the bleachers with the football players during football season this past season. And there's a number of things that we could all say, but there are people in your life that you just know that they know, and she's one of those people who truly loved what she did and would do it at any cost. And I think that speaks volumes to, even when she broke the rules, I think everybody in Central Services knew it was because at the end of the day, her first priority was her community, her school community. And there is, I don't think, as a non-educator, I think that that's what educators would want to know, is that the legacy that they left is that they would do anything, not just for her students. I was married to one of her employees, like for her employees. I should also state, when he came to work for her, I did not have a child, and he did not have a lot of time, and she made sure those educators allowed him to have parental leave with me. Like, she, as the principal, orchestrated what that could look like. So I could go on all day, but to your point, her light still shines bright, and the legacy will live on, and all of us who ever communicated with her will have so many Dana King stories. I called her by her whole name, which she also thought was funny. I'm not sure why I just called her Dana. It seemed weird to call her Dana after I became a school board member, so I just call her by her whole name. But indeed, the stories will live along, and so will her legacy. And I can't tell you the outpouring of love on social media from every student who ever attended Millbrook. So, Ms. Cash, I know that a piece of you is aching far deeper than we can understand, because you were also personal friends. But thank you for giving a little piece of her to me as we shared her as co-board members while my daughter was at Millbrook. So thank you all for those of you who are indulging us, because life is short. And I realized that in the last 7 days with the unexpected death of my family, like you wouldn't believe. And the things that overwhelm you, and I always tell board members, and this is no secret, my faith and my religion grounds me, and it's the thing that allows me to endure no matter how much insanity is around me. And so I just trust and rest in that she lived the life fully that she wanted to lead, and we can rest assured that she lived every moment of every day, and not everybody can say that. And for those of you who are listening who didn't know her, if you take one thing from me, that's what I would say, is love and live fully and give to the things that you adore, especially for our educators. I know this is exhausting, and yet you still live fully and passionately, and so just let that be a reminder that that's the legacy that we all want to live and lead, and that people will say after we're gone.
Well said. So a little bit of sadness at this board meeting today and shock, and as we move forward with the business of the school district, we do have to approve our meeting agenda. There is an amendment to remove item 6, which is recognition of the North Carolina Tech Director of the Year. She is unable to be with us today as she's not feeling well. So
I'll move approval of the agenda with that addendum, Madam Chair.
Second.
thank you. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, sign of aye. Any opposed, nay? All right. Moving on to our first information item, which is the presentation of the superintendent's proposed budget for the 2022-2023 academic year. Superintendent Moore.
Good evening, Chair Lindsay and board members. As I prepare this budget proposal for 22-23, it is clear we have moved into a new phase of our COVID-19 pandemic response. While we are optimistic that the worst has passed, we are also grappling with the effects of an event that could linger for months or years. These challenges include staffing shortages, academic recovery, mental health issues, and more. With the generous help of county commissioners and increased federal funding, we've made progress in addressing some of these needs. But we have a long way to go if we are to put every child on a path towards academic success within our new reality. In 22-23, that has to start with shoring up our workforce. In years past, I have highlighted one of the 6 core beliefs found in our strategic plan to help frame my annual budget message. This year, it seems altogether appropriate to cite our 3rd core belief: well-supported, highly effective, and dedicated principals, teachers, and staff are essential to success for all students. The national labor shortage has made it painfully clear that every single member of our organization is essential to success for all students. That's true regardless of their role. To cover gaps during the past year, for example, we've asked bus drivers to drive triple and sometimes quadruple routes to get students to and from school each day. Hundreds of central services staff report to schools each week to assist cafeteria workers, custodial staff, teachers, and instructional assistants with needs and vacancies in the schools. I'm grateful to our employees for stepping up to face these challenges. I'm also grateful to this board for taking appropriate steps to increase compensation within our financial means. To further these efforts, the bulk of this year's additional funding request is tied to raising employee compensation. More specifically, I am proposing that $35.2 million be spent to increase employee compensation as part of a total request of $56,016,340 in additional support from the county commissioners for the 22-23 school year. In addition to the $35.2 million increase for compensation, I'm obliged to include an additional $8.3 million for legislative requirements, such as costs that are incurred due to charter school expansion and increased local costs for employee hospitalization and retirement benefits. I'm also requesting an additional $6.4 million to support the opening of 4 new schools in 22-23. Apex Friendship Elementary, Barton Pond Elementary, Herbert Akins Road Middle, and the Wake College of Information and the Wake Early College of Information and Biotechnologies. As town leaders and parents can attest, these schools are necessary to address areas of growth in our county where the demand for seats has outpaced supply. The money requested here would cover the operational costs of these schools, such as staffing, supplies, maintenance, that are not included in the construction programs approved by voters. The additional increases in this proposed budget are largely tied to $6 million in long-deferred operational expenses and overall rising costs. Some costs are so significant that it is only prudent to fund them over multiple budget cycles. You will find a summary of some of those priorities in the pages that immediately follow this letter in the budget book. I'm grateful to this board and to our commissioners for their strong support in the past, which has allowed us to continue to have success in the face of unprecedented challenges. For example, results for high school end-of-course tests have close to rebounded close to their pre-pandemic levels. Our four-year graduation rate has remained over 90%. We have led the nation in the number of educators earning national board certification in our classrooms for 16 consecutive years. Magnet Schools of America earlier this year named 45 of 54 Wake County magnet schools as either schools of excellence or schools of distinction. Numerous teachers, principals, and staff members were honored with regional, state, and national awards, including Elena Ashburn of Broughton High School, who became the first Wake County principal to be named the North Carolina Principal of the Year. In closing, I want to acknowledge a group of essential personnel that I have not yet mentioned, our parents. While this budget necessarily focuses on supporting our employees and how they support our students, I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge the most important partners in education, which are our families and parents. For our parents, this pandemic has been particularly difficult, but the connection between parents and their teachers has often grown stronger in this struggle. It is beyond doubt that such commitment and partnerships keep our school system and our community strong. And it is the strength of those families and our ability to serve them that allows us to move forward together. Thank you for this time. I will now ask David Nieder, our Chief Business Officer, to provide highlights of the budget request.
Thank you, Superintendent Moore. Good evening, Chair Mahaffey, members of the board, and Superintendent. I will now get into some more details of the budget. If I could ask that the PowerPoint slide deck be put up. Thank you, Julie. And if you could go ahead and proceed to the next slide. Tonight we're presenting to you the Superintendent's proposed 22-23 operating budget. Before we get into the actual budget, though, I want to share some background on the landscape and context that the budget was developed within. Shared a little bit of this with you at your joint boards meeting a couple weeks ago, but I would like to review that again tonight. We'll then review the funding priority areas and the actual budget with you, and then lay out a path of next steps after tonight. Tonight's presentation is for information only. As we go through the presentation, you'll see that the focus is on local funding for the most part. And the reason it is, the only real opportunity that a Board of Education in North Carolina has to request funding is with the local government or the county. In North Carolina, the state legislature makes all the decisions about public school funding. And in every state in the country, the federal government makes decisions about federal funding. Next slide, please. Our actual budget development process began later than any I can remember in my 15 or so years here, largely due to the late final budget coming from the state late calendar year 21-22. Perhaps the good news out of that was it forced us through a lot of work very quickly. 2022-23 is the second year of the state biennial budget, and it does include 2.5% average increases for teachers, school administrators, and support staff already in law for that second year. As we look forward, though, the legislature will come in, I believe, in May for their short session. One of the uncertainties out there is, will they make any changes to that second year of the biennial budget? We'll have to wait and see. And we'll also have to wait and see if any of the economic uncertainty that may be on the horizon due to world events may impact the state as well as local government and federal government. I'll speak more to that in a minute. Next slide, please. So one might ask, why is the economic outlook a part of this presentation, and why does it matter to us? Well, unlike most other states, in North Carolina, boards of education have no taxing authority, and they're fiscally dependent on other governing bodies. I think we're one of only a handful of states where boards of education do not have that authority, and they're fully fiscally dependent. So we are, as I said, dependent on federal, state, and local governing bodies for their funding, policies, and decisions. And those policies and decisions are, can be influenced by the state of the economy. Next slide, please. Here's a chart we shared with you a year ago. It shows the federal, state, and local unemployment rates. And just as some general background, high unemployment rates as a general rule are not good for the economy. Low unemployment rates usually are. You can see on the left side of the chart the spike up at the beginning of the pandemic in unemployment. You can see the rapid decline. And now with Q1 of 2022 at the far right, you can see they're down to or below pre-pandemic levels. Just for your reference, blue is the national line, red is North Carolina, and green is Wake County. So you can see that as far as unemployment, the state is doing much better than the nation. And as far as Wake County, we're doing even better than the state. Next slide, please. This next slide is something you've seen in prior years as well. It's an index of North Carolina economic indicators maintained by Dr. Michael Walden at NC State University. The higher the number, the better. And as you look at this chart, the downtick you see on the left side of the graph was the Great Recession. And you see a long recovery to get back to the Great Recession levels. And then the downtick you see towards the right side of the slide was the pandemic. And you see the rapid recovery of it. I want to point out three things, though, that Dr. Walden points out about the North Carolina economy, because based on this leading economic indicators, it looks very strong and positive. He speaks to the actual state of the pandemic becoming endemic. If that were to change, and we all hope it doesn't, that could have economic implications. The second thing he points out is the conflict in Ukraine. And if the United States does get more fully or directly involved, the likely impact that will have and likely lead to a recession in the country. And finally, he points out how the Federal Reserve will manage through the rising cost of living and inflation rates through their rate increases. And that has implications for slowing the economy down too much and going into recession. Next slide. Just a couple more slides on the economy, and then we'll jump into the budget. A year ago, when we presented the proposed budget, we shared some information with you from the North Carolina Legislature's Fiscal Research Division. When we shared that a year ago, the division had just done a study in February of 2021, and then just a few months later, in June of 2021, they made revisions to their revenue projections. And that's the most recent study that we're aware of. But if you look at the chart, you'll see now that projected revenues for the current fiscal year between February and June grew by an additional $2.4 billion, up to $29 billion. And that projected revenues for next year grew by an additional $2.2 billion. So overall, if you look at state revenues, the actual revenues for 2019-20 of $23.9 billion and projections for next year of $30 billion, that's about a 28% increase in a very short period of time in state revenues. Takeaway from this slide, the state's looking pretty good. Next slide, please. The last slide I want to talk to you about on the economy and looking at things has to do with the Wake County economy. And I'm not going to go into details here, but on the 28th of March, the Board of Commissioners held a retreat where they looked at a number of things around all things budget and the economy. There is a hot link in the presentation. So if you want to go to the presentation in our Assembly system online, you can directly access the presentation materials and the agenda for the meeting. Included in the presentations, though, were projections for Wake County revenues into next year and beyond, and related economic information. Again, I'm not going to go into details, but overall is a very, very positive outlook. If you haven't been able to look at the presentation yet, I would encourage you to. There's a lot of really good information in there. Takeaway from this slide, the economic outlook for the county is really strong for now. Next slide, please. Now I want to switch gears and talk about some potential risks. Budget planning, whether you have authority or don't have taxing authority, is always just that. It's projecting. It's based on assumptions. And in this case, assumptions about decisions that other governing bodies will make that we don't control and perhaps at best have some influence over. And so what's in our proposed budget are those assumptions. What the governing bodies ultimately do are their final decisions, and there can be gaps between those two, and those gaps can create issues for budget adjustments. So that's one risk. Second risk, and I believe I spoke to this at your Joints Board meeting, I want to mention it again, the Child Nutrition Federal Reimbursement Program that the federal government put into place over the last couple of years during the pandemic that reimburses school districts across the country for all student meals is set to sunset on June 30th. We have no indication that they will extend it beyond that. That said, we have concern, and we're doing analysis right now on what the revenue picture will look like. One of the challenges is no one has had to sign up for free or reduced lunches, go through the application process over the last 2 years. There is a process for that, and if the parents of the students that might qualify for that don't go through that process, they're not eligible. So we have some concerns there. We may be coming back to you in May with a recommendation for meal price increases. We've only done that a couple times in the last years. But even if we do that, and even if the board were to approve that, it is possible that increased meal prices would still not cover our costs. Consider our costs for meals, I'm going to oversimplify, are twofold: food costs and labor costs. We all know what food costs are doing, and we all know what we're intentionally trying to do with our labor costs. These are our support staff paid some of the least in the district. So stay tuned. We may need to look at use of other local funding to supplement the CNS operation in this coming year. And finally, I'll just point out that when the legislature returns in the short session, they could make decisions to change either employer benefit contribution rates for health insurance or retirement, or compensation changes which increase our need for local funding. And when it comes to those two categories, depending on the change, it could be a large increase, and so we don't have funding in there for that, in the budget for that, but that's why we list it as a potential risk. Next slide, please. Jumping into the budget, want to go through how the operating budget is spent. Almost 90%, 89% of every operating budget dollars go straight to the schools. And I would posit that that next orange box of 4%, we have to account for it separately based on what DPI tells us to do, but I would posit that really goes directly to the schools as well, because included in facilities and operations are the maintenance costs of the buildings, the utility costs for the buildings, the child nutrition operation, the yellow bus operation, the special needs transportation operation, and so on. So I would posit it's more like 94%-ish that's going straight to the schools. You do see a charter school pass-through of 2%, but I'm going to speak to that in a second. And then the other central office areas, Board of Ed, Superintendent's Office, Communications, Academic Advancement, Administrative Services, and Technology Services, providing that backbone of support to our 193, but soon to become 197 schools. I do want to point out that when you look at the local pass-through of just local funding and not the total operating budget, 8% of our local funding goes to charter schools. That's by law. So when we request additional funding from the county, it's not all for the Wake County public school system. Approximately 8% of it is just to pass through the charter schools. Next slide, please. Just a couple things I want to show you on this slide. First, normally, federal funding represents about 8% of our overall operating budget. But you'll see here on this pie chart for next year, it's up to 15%. The reason for that is the large influx of pandemic relief funds, mostly federal. And so this pie chart will look like this for next year and likely the following year, but then we face the fiscal cliff and it will likely go back to more of the normal ratios. And I'm going to speak to the fiscal cliff more at the end of the presentation. Second thing I want to point out too on this slide, if you look at the left chart, about 3 lines down, fund balance appropriation. This proposed budget invests almost $25 million of fund balance into the budget. And again, I'll speak more about that in a future slide. Next slide, please. So the prior slide showed a total projected operating budget of just over $2 billion. Big number. Let me put context into that number by looking at funding in terms of per pupil. The current year budget provides per pupil funding for Wake County of $9,797. That has Wake County ranking at 98th in the state out of 115 districts. The lower the ranking, the more funding. We're 98 out of 115. You'll also see on the slide funding amounts from out-of-state peer districts. Again, I'll note that is from the 2018-19 year. That's the most recent year this national data is available. But again, I would posit it's still reasonably fresh to show the distinction between how schools in our state are funded versus perhaps some other peer schools in different states. Nonetheless, it tells a story. And the last comment I'll make about this slide, in the past it's frequently been brought up, well, some of these other out-of-state districts have a much higher cost of living, and that has been, past tense, been the case. Now so much less so. Didn't do a formal study, but just looking at the cost of housing alone in the Triangle area and how rapidly it's growing. I dare say, and we'll do some research, but I dare say it's going to show the cost of living is being less and less a factor here. And again, there's a stark difference in some of these districts being able to invest up to 50% more per student in that student. Next slide, please. I want to now move into some of the funding priority areas. Again, at your joint boards meeting in March, we shared significant detail about the use of pandemic relief funding in response to interrupted learning. So tonight, I will simply note that this will continue to be a focus for the 22, 23, and 24 years. Next slide, please. And you've heard already from Superintendent Moore the other top funding priorities within the superintendent budget, again with a heavy emphasis on staff compensation. Next slide, please. Public education is a human resource intensive business. 80% of our total operating budget goes to pay salaries and benefits to our staff. State funding for compensation and legislation to maintain competitive rates was not where it needed to be pre-Great Recession. And state legislation and funding to maintain competitive compensation rates has not moved forward to where it needs to be post-Great Recession. Ironically, this same post-Great Recession economy has arguably been the longest and strongest period of economic recovery and growth that any of us in this room have witnessed. The lagging of salaries impacts all categories of staff, but some more than others. And the changes to the employment marketplace that have evolved through the pandemic have only added fuel to the recruiting fire and retention fire. Takeaway from this slide: staff compensation is the fundamental focus for the proposed budget for next year. Next slide, please. Got on this slide categories of staff that were having the hardest time recruiting and retaining and with the highest vacancy rates. These vacancy rates were from earlier in March, so they may have fluctuated a little bit. Bus drivers, 22%. Almost 1 out of every 4 bus driving positions vacant. You heard Superintendent Moore speak to the extra duty they're doing, but that's not filling in all the blanks. I'll speak to that in a minute. Child nutrition workers, 17% vacancy rate. Skilled craftsmen in maintenance and operations, 25% vacancy rate. There's a little blessing in that one, in that we can contract some of those services out. We can't contract a yellow bus driver from another company. But that said, we're also competing with a red-hot construction industry, so there are limits there too. Special education teachers, 7.5%. And while that number is much lower than the other vacancy rates, it's still significantly higher than the, I think it's about 2 or 2.5% vacancy rate for regular education teachers. Instructional assistants, regular education, 9% vacancy rate. Special education, 16% vacancy rate. And central services administrator professionals, 10% vacancy rates. These vacancies are directly impacting our capacity to conduct our core business. I'll give you one example: the lack of bus drivers. I've heard stories of the last couple weeks consistently. Buses, when they get to the school late, whatever student was on that bus is getting to class late, they're losing instructional time. That's going to impact them. In addition, when a school comes to pick up in the afternoon and arrives 45 minutes or an hour late, the student may be impacted by not being able to participate in some other regular or extracurricular activity or something to do with in the home. But it's also impacting our school-based staff, including our teachers, who are required to stay there with those students and supervise them when they may otherwise be beginning their planning for the next day. Just one example. Next slide, please. So this board did approve in December to move our minimum hourly rate for support staff effective January 1 to $15 an hour. That was big. Our graded support staff positions saw increases averaging from 43% to just over 5%, with the lowest grades, who had the lowest hourly rate, seeing the biggest percentage increases. Next slide, please. As you already heard from Superintendent Moore, the proposed budget requests over $35 million to apply against staff compensation. That represents 63% of the total $56 million of additional county appropriation that is included within the proposed budget. And included within the proposal is shifting the minimum hourly rate for support staff to $16 an hour, effective July 1, and addressing compression by maintaining step differentials and grade differentials. I will note, and you'll recall, that in the state's second-year biennium budget, their plan was to move support staff of school systems to $15 an hour minimum. Whether that stays or not, we'll find out in the short session. But regardless, independently of this, we're requesting local funding to be able to move to $16 an hour minimum. Next slide, please. Also included within that $35.2 million is funding required to increase our locally funded supplements for teachers, instructional support, and school administrators by 2.5%, which then aligns with what's in the current state legislation as far as average increases for those individuals. So their entire compensation would go up by that percent. Next slide, please. This slide walks us through a bit of history on the focus of the non-certified support staff compensation. I want to take a minute and run through it just so you can see where we've been and where we hope to head. But in 2019-20, we were able to receive, through the generosity of the county commissioners, just under $8 million, $7.7 million of additional funding. That funding was used primarily to bring our bus drivers up to $15 an hour, effective January 1, 2020, right as the pandemic was about to hit. You'll see in the following year another $1.6 million. That was funding requested from the county so we could fund those bus drivers at $15 an hour for an entire year and not just for 6 months. In 21-22, you'll see the over $23 million funding that was approved. That went to all the improvements that were brought to you in December that you did approve, the biggest one being going to that $15 an hour minimum and addressing compression throughout the grades and the bands. You'll also see on here the $21.7 million, that's included within the $35 million that will be required to go to the 16. There are other things in that $35 million as well as just the $16 an hour minimum. And then finally, we've got 2 estimates out there for 23-24 and 24-25. And those are estimates for, in those years, going to $17 an hour minimum, and then in the last year, $18 an hour minimum. I do want to stress those are estimates. We didn't run the numbers like we would have for this year's budget, where accuracy is important, but we wanted to give some sense of a ballpark of what would be required to continue this progress. Next slide, please. So the superintendent's proposed budget does continue to move us forward. That said, even if the proposed budget does come to fruition, much work in this area will remain. Next slide, please. The next budget priority in the current year's budget is also part of the multi-year initiative established pre-pandemic. And for this coming year's budget, it seeks $960,000 in local funding to provide additional instructional technology support services in the schools. Next slide, please. Our utilization of instructional technology continues to expand. The onset of the pandemic and going all virtual put that on steroids by effectively putting us into a student device 1-to-1 ratio, pushing us onto even more digital content platforms, providing additional student and teacher resource applications, engaging additional virtual teaching platforms, and also acquiring additional classroom technology. All these things require support, however, because they've got to be working effectively, and staff and students have to understand how to utilize them in order to leverage it. Next slide, please. This is a multi-year initiative as well, and I'd just like to walk you through where we come and where we'd like to go. We did invest in 2019-20 and 2020-21 about $600,000 in this initiative in each of those 2 years. And then for the current year, we invested $869,000, but you'll see that's in a different column. It's in the federal column. We invested for the current year using pandemic relief funds. Our proposed budget for this coming year that's being presented tonight requests $960,000 of local funding to continue this endeavor. I do want to point out that those resources that are funded by pandemic relief funds will need to be addressed with the fiscal cliff, because the funding that they're currently on will go away at the end of into the 24-25 school year, and so we will manage that through the fiscal cliff. Next slide, please. Next priority area I would like to go over with you. Again, it was a multi-year initiative established pre-pandemic. An area of critical need related to behavioral health supports, counselors, school psychologists, and social workers. Ratios of students to staff have not aligned with our student needs or national standards. And while we have made progress in the prior year endeavor to target national standards, the pandemic has exacerbated the need for these supports. This year's proposed budget requests $900,000 of pandemic relief funds. And if I could ask you to go to the next slide. Thank you, Julie. I want to go through the history. In 1920, you can see there was $1.7 million of state funding invested, just under $1 million of local funding. The following year, $2.3 million of federal funding, and for the current year, $8 million of federal funding. Again, just as I spoke to the instructional technology support positions, the $8 million invested for the current year is using pandemic relief funds. That will become part of the fiscal cliff because we fully intend to maintain these positions post-pandemic and post-pandemic relief funds. So again, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the cliff towards the end of the presentation. Next slide, please. Final priority area I'd like to go over with you has to do with our maintenance and operations area. These are the folks that make sure all of our schools are maintained in proper working order And as I heard during your discussion during the board work session on a couple of the facility items, the fact that as these facilities get older and they're not renovated, their needs for maintenance become more frequent and more complex. I'll leave it at that. So we started a few years ago targeting getting our maintenance and operations funding formulas to a national average of funding per square foot. During the Great Recession, as we made a lot of budget cuts and we tried to mitigate the impact directly on the classroom, maintenance and operations was one of many areas that received significant reductions. So the proposed budget does request $5 million of additional local funding for this initiative. And I will note, and you'll see on the next slide, we are also proposing removing $2 million of maintenance and operations funding from the pandemic relief funds to begin mitigating that fiscal cliff. So that said, it really would be a net increase in funding for the maintenance and operations for next year of $3 million. Next slide, please. So on this slide, again, you'll see the history. In the first year of the initiative, 2019-20, we were able to invest an additional $2.5 million, In the following year, just $1 million. I'll remind everyone that following year was the onset of the pandemic. We had no idea what the economic implications were. We went in that year with a very austere budget and went very late on these multi-year initiatives. And then if you look at the current year, you'll see we have placed $13.5 million of funding for maintenance and operations, additional funding on the pandemic relief funds. The current year, or next year's proposal, we're requesting $5 million, and then you can see the next 3 years, $5.6 million, and that would take us to the national standard for funding per square foot. We're currently at 87% of that standard. Next slide, please. Want to switch gears. You heard me state this already, but beyond the additional $56 million that's being requested from the county, the superintendent's proposed budget also invests $25 million of fund balance. And if this level of investment is approved and remains, Board Policy 8101 will need to be waived, as this amount represents slightly over 50% of the June 30, 2021 unassigned fund balance. Next slide, please. You've already heard from Superintendent Moore that we're opening 4 new schools next year. 2 elementary, Apex Friendship and Barton Pond, a middle, Herbert Akins, and an early college of information and biotechnology. They all will have operating costs that are not covered by the state. Utility costs, maintenance costs, perhaps less so when they're brand new. And they also receive local funding for students that are not associated with their fixed amounts, whether you have 50 students in the building or 500 students in the building. So that represents the $6.4 million request. Next slide, please. And the last category I will go over is a $4.9 million request for newer expanding programs, including a change to the high school assistant principal formula, a change in retitling high school clerical assistants and upgrading them to receptionists, expansion of magnet school programming, both athletics and performing arts, school allotment expansion, AIG expansion, some central support positions. I'm not going to get into the detail on this tonight, given the time, but details on each of these and actually every other one of these funding initiatives is included, and these newer expanding ones begin on page 154 of your budget document. Next slide, please. So the budget document is now posted at our website, PDF format available to look at or even download. And as the board works through the process of going from the superintendent's budget to the board's proposed budget to the board's adopted budget, each of those will be posted on our website. Next slide. This is a very brief orientation to the budget document. I'm not going to go through it. It's very similar to how it's been organized in the past. I believe we now have one board member, Ms. Waters, that has not been through this process. I'll be glad to work with you and staff, sort of walk you through it. So we'll work something out if you would like that. Next slide, please. All right, I've been saying I'm going to talk about the fiscal cliff. Well, here we go. We've got approximately $30 million invested in the pandemic relief funds in what I would call recurring expenditures that we desire to continue after the pandemic relief funds are no longer available. The primary areas are behavioral health supports, the instructional support technicians, and the maintenance and operations funding. As we developed this year's proposed budget, there were competing needs for addressing the fiscal cliff now versus dealing with our number one priority, staff compensation. So you saw the limited attempt of $2 million reduction of pulling $2 million off of that $30-ish million. We believe we're going to find another $8 to $12 million relatively easily, which won't have direct impact. But we think it's likely that as we prepare a budget a year from now, proposed budget, we're likely going to also have competing needs. So we've had some initial conversations, and they will continue because we've got 3 budget cycles to address the fiscal cliff, 22-23, 23-24, and 24-25. And we may be regrouping. And rather than looking at asking for additional local funding to backfill the funding cliff, looking at our existing operating budget and looking at how we can repurpose funds within that existing operating budget so we can continue doing these initiatives that we have begun using the pandemic relief funding. Stay tuned, more to come. Next slide. So, as you go through the budget document, we'd ask you to send any questions to our Senior Director of Budget. She's sitting way over there, Terry Kimsey, to her email. And at your next Finance Committee meeting and board work session, depending on how it works out, either Finance Committee or Finance Committee and board work session, the board will have a budget work session where you will have the opportunity to discuss the budget, and I'll cover that in a minute. But we'll also review those questions, board member questions and staff responses, with you at the Finance Committee meeting. And we'll also post those questions and responses on our website along with the budget documents, again, for complete transparency and so the public can see as well. At your board meeting on the 19th, you'll hold a public hearing on the budget. And then based upon what direction the board directs the superintendent and staff to make adjustments or changes to the budget, or perhaps sends us back to the drawing board on certain things, we may require an additional board work session. Our target currently is to have you approve your proposed budget on May 3rd. Again, that may need to adjust based on the need to add work sessions. And we need to get the board's proposed budget to the county commissioners before May 15th to meet statutory requirements. Next slide. And it's the last slide, I promise. At your work session, again, we will present the questions, board member questions and responses, but the primary focus of that is for the board to discuss the budget, see if they are in consensus about it, see if they do want to redirect the superintendent and staff to go in some different directions, and then we go from there. And that concludes my presentation, which again tonight is for information only, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Nader. We look forward to getting our questions to Ms. Kimsey and seeing you again on the 19th for our work session.
Thank you.
And what's the deadline for getting those questions, Ms. Kimsey? Did I
We'll
miss
put
it?
an email out.
Okay.
We'll take a look.
Thank you.
Yes, and we'll push an email out.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kushner. Next up, we have our superintendent updates. Superintendent Moore.
I'll just be providing some updates on the information that the board engaged on during our work session today. The first two items of the work session were an update on the 2022 CIP cost model update and the existing school renovation and replacement rubrics as we get ready to move forward with requesting from the county commissioners the funds that will be necessary to continue our 7-year plan for the building of new schools and renovation of existing schools, which will likely require that our county commissioners look at putting a bond on the ballot in November. The next item that we went over was the Gaggle pilot that is being implemented in school districts across North Carolina, including Wake County, using state-designated federal funds for internet security. We went over the pilot schools that are currently engaged in that work, the messaging that has gone out, examples of the types of things that are being done, and clarification that these are only Wake County platforms that are part of the Gaggle pilot, things like regular social media, Twitter, TikTok, individual student email, they're not part of this program. The last item that we engaged in during the work session was an overview of the Student Engagement Team, SET grant. This is a collaboration between Wake County Cooperative Extension, Alliance Health, and the Wake County Public School System. It is a multi-year grant that will provide support to 4 specific schools that will have the opportunity through some additional resources, staffing, and other connections to our community partners, wraparound services for students who have high needs. This was really born out of the work really during the pandemic, where we did so much around food security with our partners in the community to support our students, and recognized through our work and with our social workers and our county health partners that the needs extended beyond food security for many of our families. So this will provide an opportunity to provide support to those students. And those were the updates from the work session. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Moore. We now move on to public comment. Public comment is accepted in video, written, and in-person formats. Members of the public are welcome to offer comments or criticism directed at substantive ideas, actions, or procedures of the board and individual board members. In the interest of maintaining civility and decorum, however, speakers are encouraged to refrain from personal attacks and insults directed at the board, individual board members, staff, or members of the general public. The laws and policies of North Carolina provide that issues or concerns involving individual personnel matters are confidential and therefore not appropriate for public comment settings. Concerns related to personnel issues may be addressed through applicable WCPSS policies, the grievance policy, or other applicable policies. Speakers, including students, may discuss issues and matters of general concern but should refrain from discussing confidential student information. Concerns related to confidential student matters may be addressed through applicable WCPSS personnel, the grievance policy, or other applicable policies. The following citizens have submitted comments as part of the public comment portion for this evening's agenda. These comments are linked on the same online agenda that we are using for tonight's meeting. That agenda, as well as guidelines for those wishing to submit comments for future meetings, can be found at the school district's website, wcpss.net, under the tab labeled School Board. We have 30 written comments and 2 video comments from members of the public. The topics of which comments are attached to the agenda are as follows: 6 on books, 7 on class rank, 2 on prom, 5 for thank you, and 10 miscellaneous comments including maintenance, curriculum, special accommodations, masks, germ theory, drug searches, background checks, transgender and CRT, ALC student achievement, OCS, and LGBTQ books. For those of you that are here to speak in person during public comment, you may speak for up to 3 minutes. A yellow light will illuminate at the podium when there are 30 seconds remaining in your time, and a red light will signal your time is up. Please remain at the podium during your speaking time. Any materials you wish to share with the board should be handed to the board attorney either before or after your comments. And our attorney is located right over there. Thank you. First up is Janet Peterson.
Hi, my name is Janet Peterson. I have a combined 36 years in teaching and working with young children, 25 years teaching in Wake County Public Schools, teaching kindergarten through second grade. I am since retired. My team and I have read and reviewed books that are found in Wake County Public School libraries that belong in the adult book section and bookstores. You are allowing the sexualization of children and teens. I'm about to read to you passages from some of those books, and I'm asking if there are any young people in here under 18 to please leave the room. Let me read you first some excerpts from the North Carolina statute on obscene literature and exhibitions. Sexual conduct is defined as vaginal, anal, or oral intercourse, whether actual or simulated, normal or perverted, masturbation, excretory functions, or lewd exhibition, an act or condition that depicts torture, physical restraint, or being fettered or bound. All of these items are found in the books that are in Wake County Public Schools. I have a few back here, and there are many. Let me begin by reading to you from the V-Word book. Since I felt a particular longing for intimacy and sex that grew each year, I kept to my romance novels, finding new scenes. I learned how to touch myself with my own hands, how to draw circles with my fingers where my body liked it best. When chat rooms first came into vogue, I discovered cybersex. I would ask faceless men to imagine what they wanted to do to me, blocking the ones who wanted to be roughed, clicking away from the ones that wanted to receive oral sex. I chatted with the ones who wanted to enter me with their tongues. And it goes on. This book is full of it, and it's in several high schools here in Wake County. I tried stroking her stomach, thighs, nipples, hip, following the path of my hands with soft kisses. It was all lovely, but it felt like nothing was really happening. Flustered, I pushed to get on my back. Maya boldly took a plunge and kissed her way down my body until she was on my clit, kissing and licking. That's in Wake County Public Schools. Let me read to you from a poem from the book Identical. And I'll just read a section. The poem is entitled True to His Word. It starts with Ty's voice is almost a snarl. He wraps his rope around my hands. He ties it tightly. I shake my head, excuse me, I shake my head. Don't, but he does. Should I scream? Would anyone hear? Would anyone care? That's about bondage. I have another about incest. And that's right here, like I said, in our books, and I'm really sad. You've allowed the selection of such books into our libraries. Media specialists, librarians, principals, review teams all have signed off on these books. I tell you, you
Thank
must
you, Ms.
protect
Peterson.
the
Your
innocence
time
of
has
our children
expired.
and teens.
Our next speaker is Jim Walsh.
Good evening, parents and board members. I would like to read the statute, but it's already been read, and I think you can maintain what was said in a little bit. And the school board has direct policies that override that law, and those policies were given grant to the school board by statute of the legislator, and the policies are that if material comes before the school board that is questioned, it goes to the principal, review committee, and then another review committee, and then another review committee, and then it comes to the board. Well, we have a book, Lawn Boy. On November 6th of 21, it was brought to the attention of Cary High School principal. On November 22nd, a response came back saying, this book's appropriate. On January 12th, the Central Instructional Materials Advisory Committee recommended that the book stay. And then it went to a board appeal here. On March 10th, the board decided 2-1 that this was appropriate material. Now, I'm going to repeat what Janet said. If there's any children listening, I personally do not want them to hear this. Lawn Boy can be found in the following high schools: Apex, Cary, Fuquay, Green Level, Panther Creek, Sanderson, South Gardner, and Willow Springs. Page 19. But there's one thing I'd never tell Nick in a million years, not that it really matters. In 4th grade, at church youth group meeting, out in the bushes behind the parsonage, I touched Dick Goebel's dick, and he touched mine. In fact, there were even some mouths involved. Page 25. Placing her knee between my legs, she wrestled off the sweater and unbuttoned her blouse and pulled off her panties, and she climbed on top of me before I even had a chance to savor the moment. I'm not saying I was grateful. To this day, I remain grateful to Gina, and whatever whim or combination of alcohol and restless prompted her to unbutton my jeans and straddle me in the passenger seat. Page 91, you get the gist. Now, I challenge our committee and our parents to accept this as acceptable practice in our school system. This is not. Parents, you need to get active in what the board is doing. I would also say the parents are getting active. Oh, they're homeschooling. The only thing that needs to follow now is the cash to follow the student. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Tucker Willenborg. Tucker Willenborg.
On behalf of the students of Wake County, I ask the board, do you care about us? Will you take action to prevent a needless and harmful cause of suffering, class rank? Instead of stepping up to support us amid the devastation this pandemic has unleashed on our lives, this board is actively choosing to ignore us. As the class of 2023 moves towards college application season, I ask this board to finally act on class rank. As a student at Green Level, one of the highest performing high schools in this district, I see the harms of class rank firsthand. It isn't pretty, especially with the PC-19 pandemic grading policy. The competition is ugly. Numerous colleges state that class rank is an important or even highly important factor for admissions and scholarships. Some colleges even have class rank requirements, requiring students to be in the top 10% for scholarships. At Green Level, however, a top 10 ranking is a nearly hopeless endeavor, an endeavor that harms every student. Green Level has national merit finalists outside the top 10%. Green Level has straight A students outside the top 25%. Green Level has students poised to graduate with this board's magna cum laude high honors designation, ranked outside the top 25, ranked in the bottom 25% of their class. Students at my school employ harmful strategies to maintain the ranks. Some take multiple online courses at Wake Tech after school or over the summer, triggering additional stress and harming extracurricular activities. Students utilize PC-19 to drop lower-weighted courses, often with high A grades, to boost their class ranks, subjecting them to unsightly pass marks on their transcripts, and as well as allegations of cheating from their peers, whose ranks are lowered as a result. And nearly all of the top-ranked students at my school pick their courses explicitly for class rank, choosing courses like Microsoft Word Honors over much more valuable career preparatory courses like Python programming. You are harming our futures and livelihoods because of class rank. This is the very definition of unhealthy competition. None of us benefit, all of us are harmed. If this board instead calculated class rank using the Latin honors methodology that was approved in 2016, we would have clear achievements targets and none of the tremendous uncertainty from which we currently suffer. This proposal is fair. It complies with state law. It complies with state board policy. It is in your hands to implement. The current policy of printing inaccurate and harmful exact class ranks deals a tremendous amount of harm. It imperils our chances at admissions, scholarships, and athletic recruitment. It punishes us for choosing courses for our future goals. It creates a painfully competitive high school culture. And worst of all, it isn't even fair. Therefore, on behalf of students of Green Level High School and of Wake County as a whole, I request this board update its policies on class rank, policies that this board can and should change today. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Susan Book.
Hello. First and foremost, happy Autism Awareness, Acceptance, and in my house, Appreciation Month. We should be celebrating our autistic students as well as our autistic staff and teachers and those who work in our wonderful buildings. We should also be mindful that these students go out into the real world. And my hope is that Wake County schools can be an incredible place for them to find jobs just like everywhere else. Please make sure that your policies have inclusivity that not only affects students, but also the work life that might happen here. Now, no one should feel shame for who they are or who they love. I'm not really good at this. I'd rather speak policy any day. But today I'm here to stand with Wake students who identify as LGBTQ, with their parents and with their community. I'm here to stand with Black and brown students, parents, and community. I stand to promote a safe place for them to live and learn, a place where their lives are reflected positively in the books in our libraries, where history is celebrated, debated, but most of all, taught honestly with primary and secondary sources available in their own schools. This is the very least we could do. Please, board, I ask you to continue to lift up those who others might put down. Continue and invest in equity. We obviously need the Office of Equity now more than ever. Love one another. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Carrie Bly.
Hello again. This is our anniversary. We started asking you for viable math learning resources for our kids April 2nd, 2019, 3 years ago. Today is our second history speech to you. Last time we discussed how you vetted MVP and Open Up math curriculums through IMET, EQUIP, and Ed Reports. And while it sounds extensive and impressive, we thought you might want to understand that they're all rooted in the exact same metric and foundational text. Today, we want to run the history of the only other data source you say you use to pick our kids' curriculum, and that's your 2016 TNTP audit. The first time we ever heard that was in the June 18th, 2019 board meeting. It was justification for why the board dismissed our formal complaints. And you presented this TNT report as one of the major catalysts behind adopting new middle and high school curriculums. I asked for a copy of that report, and it took you 2.5 months to find it. And I'm going to repeat that. It took you 2.5 months to find a report that you paid $170,881 for, that you called a driving force behind your math curriculum adoptions. And that was our first red flag. Initially, what bothered me most was the timeline. You hired them in March 15th. You did 7 days of curriculum audits in April and May, and then 27 days after you were done, North Carolina adopted new high school math standards, June 2nd of 2016. That's when you told us that NC stopped operating under Common Core. You knew that we were going to get new standards, yet you sent out an RFP, selected and accepted TNT's proposal. The only proposal that mentions Common Core standard alignment 46 times in their 13-page proposal to you. That's a very good example of what we mean by a lack of transparency and a lack of communication. Now, in Dr. Martin's speech on June 18th, he sort of asked a question after noting the dire state of math education. He said that the low proficiency data nor the Wake County audit did not result in public or parental outcry. And it sounded like you were trying to admonish us. Well, I have an answer for you. We did not outcry because you did not release this report. Never. Wake County conducted a Common Core curriculum quality review, changed the name of it. Then once you got the results in May, you sat on them for 6 months until you reduced the 75-page report to 12 slides that you discussed 6 months later in November in a student achievement committee behind closed doors, not on camera, in the middle of a weekday. No, you did not hear us cry out. You didn't hear us cry out until we saw our kids crying at the kitchen table because they got a 13 on a test again. When we watched them hunched over their computers for hours trying to Google basic math concepts to figure out how to do their homework.
Thank you, Ms. Bly. Rachel Blackwood is our next speaker.
First of all, thank you. I'd like to thank each of you for serving over the last 2 years. I know it hasn't been easy. I know it hasn't always made you very popular. But I do know, and I was able to see that your heart was with the needs of the children, and that is something that I appreciate as a parent. And I'd like to appeal to the heart of the board yet again today. Recently, there were discussions about moving some of the students from Abbott's Creek Elementary School to Durant Road Elementary School, to my school, my children's school. And that proposal was fought by the community, by Abbott's Creek parents, and even the media. But something was left out of that conversation. The needed renovations at Durant Road Elementary School was left out of that conversation. You see, Abbott's Creek Elementary is just across the street from us. It serves a high socioeconomic status base. It's a brand new, beautiful facility. Everything's in working order. The students don't have to worry about if their bathroom's going to work or if they're going to a dilapidated trailer. In a sharp contrast, the students at Durant Road Elementary School have a very rundown school. It's 30 years old. We're not even on the renovation list. We serve a very low socioeconomic status group of children. Many of our children are food insecure. Some of them are homeless. They live in deplorable conditions. And then they come to a school that's been run down and quite frankly has not been maintained the way it should by the county. And I know that the money is an issue, but I also know that while my neighbors across the street at Abbott's Creek Elementary School from the upscale neighborhoods get a brand new school with everything in working order, our students deserve the same. Regardless of socioeconomic status, they deserve the same. And so I'd like to plead with you to put us on the renovation list, to give us a chance to make our school look as beautiful on the outside as it is on the inside. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Lindsay Tobin.
Thank you. As we are beginning to see the ramifications that the pandemic has had on our children, there is significant learning loss as well as anxiety and depression. And while most are acknowledging this, instead of working hard to correct this, we are lowering standards. Now, this goes from babies' developments all the way up to high school graduations. And I believe we need to get back to the basics with our children's education. We live in the greatest country in the world, and our students need to have the best education in the world. The focus needs to be on math, science, technology, etc. During COVID, one of the board members stated that there was much more suffering in the world than what was happening with our children. And that is on full display right now, every day. But the only way that we ensure that that type of suffering does not come to us in future generations is to ensure that we are building strong future leaders. Our children cannot compete and will not have the proper tools to be great thinkers and innovators if we deny them a robust education in favor of personal causes.
We can teach about our government without bringing political ideology or rhetoric in. We can teach about self-acceptance and love and the acceptance of others' differences without sexualizing our children. I personally know a mother whose first graders class was asked to vote in 2020 for either Biden or Trump. I know a family whose second grader was given the gender unicorn handout. My kindergartner knows nothing about these topics, nor should he. He is young and innocent. Why are we so insistent on making our children grow up faster than they should? Years ago, many people were offended by religion being taught in public schools. Religion is very personal to someone's identity, and people can be uncomfortable with others outside of their family teaching this to their children. Do we not see politics and sexuality as very personal issues? Why would it be okay for them to be taught in public schools? It seems that we are putting our personal fears and burdens of this world on our children's shoulders. When our children look into the world, they don't see politics, they don't see hate, they don't care what your skin color is or who your partner at home is. And instead of taking this away from them, we should learn from them. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Gil Pagan. Our next speaker is Gil Pagan.
Good evening, school board members. Wanted to bring to your attention a few books of many that are in the Wake County Public School Library system. One book, and these books are pornographic in nature. One book is called George, and this book is about transsexualism, and it also has references to incest. This book called Blankets is a graphic novel by Greg Thompson, has pornographic pictures inside of a boy and a girl having sex, and there's also masturbation in this book. And the third book is Lawn Boy, which I'm sure you're familiar with. Lawn Boy is a book that has a story in it about two Mexican-American boys that are 10 years old that go behind a church and engage in oral sex, and that book is in the Wake County Public School Library system. And I'm going to read to you a piece of that book, a page from page 91. What's normal then, Nick? Tell me that. Your porn habit? The way you talk about women? Oh, like you don't watch porn? Actually, no. You're a liar. What if I told you I touched another guy's dick? I said, Nick waved me off and turned his attention back to his beer. What if I told you I sucked it? Will you please just shut up already? I'm dead serious, Nick. Well, I'd say you were a fag. I put Doug Gobble's dick in my mouth. The real estate guy, yeah, that guy. Nick looked around frantically. What the fuck are you talking about? These are the books that are in the public school library system. And by the way, this book in particular was voted on by this board to remain in the library. I don't understand why you would do that. How dare you ignore parents, phone calls, concerns like this to pull these books out, ignoring their emails. How dare you take away the rights of parents to shield their kids from this type of stuff, pornographic books in our public school library. How dare you decide to put these books in these libraries at the hands of these children? Parents are upset, they are angry. Hispanic parents are upset and angry because these books are in the public school system. We demand you take these books out now from these libraries and put them away where they should not be seen or touched again. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Steve Bergstrom. Steve Bergstrom. Our next speaker is Amanda Lunn.
Growing up, I had the opportunity to attend 3 different public schools in grade school. The second was in West Tennessee. The powers that be tried to shield students from particular subjects. One of these subjects at that time was Darwinism. Teachers weren't allowed to teach it. Students were not allowed to talk about it. The message I received as a young child was that Darwinism was the devil's work and that it was not suitable to be taught in public schools. I am not sure exactly how I picked that up. It really could have been the result of parents and the public having meetings such as this. But fast forward to 9th grade, I had moved to Western New York. I was in science class, and a teacher publicly taught about Darwin's theories. My jaw dropped, my eyes bulged. Here I was witnessing a teacher teaching a subject that had not been previously allowed to be taught to me, and the students were doing just fine. They took it in like they take in every other piece of information that they receive in their school existence. The teacher didn't teach it in a way that forced it as truth. It was taught as a theory, an educated guess that hadn't yet been able to be proven false by scientific evidence. Students were simply given a new piece of information they could use in their data bank to think critically about. Then in my freshman year of college, my roommate self-identified as Jewish. Again, my jaw dropped, my eyes bulged. I'm not sure if I spoke out loud or if it was just in my head. But what I thought was, oh my gosh, your family survived. Your people survived. That's amazing that they survived the Holocaust. Why did I think that? Due to a lack of diversity, due to a lack of inclusive curriculum, the only time I ever encountered the concept that a Jewish person existed was in that very short segment that we taught about the Holocaust. Diversity matters. Inclusive curriculum matters. They foster new perspectives, open-mindedness, opportunities for critical thinking, and empathy. While reading, writing, and arithmetic are important, these life skills also have so much value, and our students deserve an opportunity to hear them and formulate their own opinions. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Lisa Beiser.
Hello. I am here to talk to you about class rank, as you've already heard some speakers already address. We recognize that class rank is often very detrimental to our students' well-being. I want you to know that this is an issue that's not just relevant to Wake County students and parents and administrators. I'm a parent in the Chapel Hill Carborough City School District. We also care very passionately about this issue of class rank and how it can be very harmful to our students. In fact, our district over the past decade has tried several times to challenge the state rule that insists on class rank. They haven't been successful in the past, but there is some hope, some opportunity now that there could be a different interpretation of this state mandate that would allow some flexibility with class rank. And there is definitely some momentum in several districts in the state, and so I encourage the board to be open-minded to what some of the opportunities might be. I've got a real quick personal anecdote in terms of the damage to mental health, to the sense of extreme competitiveness that students, high school students feel because of class rank. My daughter is a freshman at UNC Chapel Hill right now. She graduated from Carborough High School last year. She very much decided she would play the class rank game, and it absolutely is a game. And from the time she was in middle school, she was on a mission to have a high class rank. We actually discouraged her from pursuing that mission because it didn't seem to be a very, very valid use of life energy, but she wanted to do it, and she did it and graduated graduated toward the top of her class and was happy with that. Now, as a college freshman, she has so much regret looking back on that incredibly stressful, negative, competitive experience that she had in high school, and now she's the biggest advocate for anything we can do to change that environment. The other issue I was going to mention is that professionally I have worked in the area of college admissions over the last 20 years or so, and so I have the perspective and opinion that the colleges do not want to see class rank. If it's there when an applicant applies to a university, you have to look at it, you have to consider it, you actually have to report it, and your statistics as a university are measured by the rank of your students. But if it's not there, you have more flexibility to kind of make the right decisions and holistically evaluate candidates. So I've got someone I know who's dean of admissions at a highly selective institution, and she had one point of advice to me: if you can do anything in North Carolina in your district, it's to get rid of class rank. It is killing your students when they apply to our institution because they have class rank attached to them. So thank you for your time, and I look forward to hopefully having additional conversations about options in the state for changes to class rank. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Robin Livingston.
So I've had 3 students in the Wake County Public School System. 2 have graduated, and my youngest is in 8th grade. My kids have had some amazing experience in this school system. I grew up in a small, very rural town where our schools were wonderful but had limited resources. Through Wake County's public school system, my kids have traveled to Europe, Washington, D.C. My daughter trained and performed with a world-class musician through her band program. She also marched with her marching band at Disney. And my kids have had access to a much higher level of course than were available to me. In order to continue that level of education, we need to make sure our school system continues to provide as many educational resources as possible. This is National Library Week. In honor of that, I would like to encourage you to make library book funding a priority. Libraries don't need fewer books, we need more. The WCPSS website is available in 8 different languages. We have kids from all over the world in our school system. These kids have different backgrounds, experiences, religions, languages, etc. In North Carolina, a school librarian is required to have a teaching license and a master's degree. These people are trained to provide resources that are age appropriate for a wide audience. Some of these resources are not always going to be pretty. In fact, some books are very disturbing. But not everything we learn about the world is going to be pretty. The good news is the American voting public agrees. In a recent poll commissioned by the American Library Association, 71% of voters oppose efforts to have books removed from their local libraries. This is bipartisan, with 75% Democrats, 70% Republican, and 58% independents opposing such bans. 90% of voters and 92% of parents have a favorable opinion of the librarians who work in local public libraries and in school libraries. Most voters are confident in local public libraries to make good decisions about their collections and think libraries do a good job representing a variety of viewpoints. The biggest takeaway for me from the poll information was that 74% of parents are confident in public school libraries' decisions about their collections. That means parents who are fighting to ban books are on the wrong side of the issue. Some of these parents come speak before the board claiming to speak for the parents of Wake County, but they do not speak for me. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Michelle Manley.
Hello, I thank you for the opportunity to speak. I had the blessing of being able to be at your last meeting with the both the county commissioners and you guys when you were a joint session, and so I appreciate everything that was shared about the budget. I'm really concerned for this reason. I don't know if you guys remember, I have 5 children. 3 of them are out of K through 12 now, but 2 are still in, and I'm really concerned about the quality of education, and I feel like that really should be the primary focus of a school board of Wake County, being the 14th largest school district in all of the country, we have an opportunity to really make a difference, not only here in North Carolina, but throughout this nation. And this is my concern. A few weeks ago, there was an article in the Charlotte Observer that said that 50% of 18 to 40-year-olds in North Carolina will not be able to accept the new jobs that are coming to North Carolina. And you know, in 2008, North Carolina probably did better than any other state in getting through the recession, and we're about to head into a deep recession again. And what we should be wanting, we should be preparing our children. By the time they're 18 years old and they get out of high school, they should be able to be critically thinking and able to take whatever jobs are available to them. If they want to go on to a further education, absolutely, they should be prepared to do that. But I think they should be ready for adulting at this point. And what I would like to see, I'd like to see curriculum textbooks come back. I think we would have avoided a lot in this pandemic if we were not completely relying on education through the laptop. And I think what you said, Mr. Martin, was absolutely incredible when you said hands-on learning works, and especially for children that are in elementary aged education. They like the experience. They like being able to talk and to touch and to see and to feel. They like specials. We need to get books back into our schools that are textbooks so the parents know what the children are being taught. So if there is a learning loss, if there is something that they missed, chapters 2 and 3 and 4 chapters back, they are able to then pick up on that. I found a lot of talk about learning delays, or whatever you're going to call it, learning loss over the last 2 years with COVID. But I will tell you, we have gone in the last 15 years from being being 12th in the nation here in Wake County, or here in North Carolina, to being 38th in the nation. That is not okay. We are a state that has opportunities from the coasts all the way to the mountain. You can be anything that you want to be here in North Carolina, and I would encourage you, we need to focus on educational excellence. We need to focus on the foundations. From K through 3rd grade, we should be focusing on reading, writing, and math, and we need to get all of this political ideology, all of the sexual ideology, everything else that is not focused on reading, writing, and math, because if you can read, if you can write, if you can do basic math, you can learn anything. And our children deserve that. In 10 short years, every child that is in 2nd grade will be graduated, will be an adult, and will be entering into the workforce. We need them to be prepared to be the next leaders and to keep North Carolina great. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Ruth Willenberg. Ruth Willenberg.
The current class rank system was created in the past, 1995, and no longer works today. So much has changed, and given how much more complex and rich the academic offerings are for our students, we have an opportunity, quite frankly an obligation, to change the system to more accurately and fairly recognize student accomplishments. For Wake County class ranks, a 90 equals a 100. This creates a huge pool, 100, 150, 200 kids, all with unweighted 4.0 GPAs. Instead of rewarding the accomplishments of straight A's, Wake County is punishing these students with a so-called exact class rank based on course weightings. In-class performance isn't even considered. Head-to-head wins, perfect 100s, make no difference. Microsoft Word Honors wins over biomedical technology. In fact, a 90 in Microsoft Word Honors wins over a 100 in biomedical technology. Worse yet, the kids who received AP Computer Science are ranked ahead of the kids who signed up but didn't get in. And the kids who chose PASS, PC19, over numeric grades in their academic courses are ranked ahead. Class rank in Wake County doesn't measure academic performance. Given the problems with course scheduling, especially with split schools during the pandemic, class rank is not even an accurate reflection of desired course rigor. It's broken. Wake County is actively certifying inaccurate data and harming students. On behalf of over 200 parents and students, we are asking Wake County to immediately eliminate the class rank from transcripts and replace it with Latin honors class rank. This can be done now without any state-level policy changes. There is no state law to send class rank to out-of-state or private universities. There is no state policy that class rank has to be an exact numeric rank, or that weighted GPA needs to be 4 decimal points in precision. Nowhere. All the policy says is that class rank is calculated based on weighted GPA. Latin honors are calculated based on weighted GPA. A Latin honors class rank based on weighted GPA does not violate any state law or state policy. Wake County can address the class rank problem by switching to Latin honors.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Jacob Arthur.
Good evening. My name is Jacob Arthur, and I have 4 children, 3 of whom are in Wake County Public Schools, with a 4th waiting in the wings. I'm also a candidate for the District 7 seat on the board, and I regret Mr. Haggerty is not here. I would have liked to have earned his vote. I would like to use my time to address a great harm I see being done to our students through much of the curriculum coming out of the Office of Equity Affairs and the inappropriate materials that are available in our school libraries. It is no secret to parents that any student with a smartphone can access inappropriate material. However, there is no excuse for it being made available in our schools, even in the name of affirming our students. While your intent may be to make students feel valuable and worthy of recognition, what you're actually doing is far worse. By promoting these materials in our schools in the name of affirmation, you are in fact teaching our students that their value as people is found in their sexuality or gender. Our children have value and are worthy of recognition and love by the fact that they are human beings, and they are our children. Nothing more, nothing less. Likewise, much of the curriculum from the Office of Equity Affairs is teaching our children to begin relationships with each other from a starting point of what makes us different, rather than what unites us as human beings. For example, my 7th graders class is reading Ghost Boys to supplement their unit on Frederick Douglass. In reviewing this book, the school library journal is quoted as saying it, quote, provides an important window for readers who are just beginning to explore the ideas of privilege and implicit bias. In other words, critical race theory. My wife and I are graduates of the Wake County Public School System. I can tell you from my experience that the pushing of ideological materials is not making things better, and it's not improving academics. Yesterday was the anniversary of the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., a man who implored us to judge each other by the content of our character. Unfortunately, the more this board pushes diversity, equity, and inclusion, the less diverse, equal, and inclusive we seem to become. It is time to spend our dollars on actual academics and not social agendas. As your social agenda has advanced, the data show proficiency in reading and math continues to decline over the past decade. It is time to let parents parent. It is time to let teachers teach. Again, I'm Jacob Arthur, and I'm running for school board. You can find information at jacobarthurwakeschools.com. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Amanda Holobeen.
Well, I came here to speak about several things, and, you know, a lot of these things that have been said today, they've been said already. Y'all have heard these books being read before, and actually on January 18th, you were served with paperwork, and part of the paperwork had statements with some of the very literature that was read from this podium in it, saying how it was inappropriate. Also, my son has access that he's 8 on his Wake County Public School System laptop. Immediately pulled up genderqueer. Immediately was able to see all the photos. Both this board, the Cary Police Department, apparently is in the pocket of y'all also. Michael Glover at Liberty Mutual, Amy Bolton at Liberty Mutual, all feel that this is appropriate It's appropriate for an 8-year-old to pull up those images. It's appropriate for these surveys, the survey that came out. So you have gaggle, right? You want to follow what the students are reading. You know what they're reading. We've shown you what they're reading. They're reading things they should not read. But you can gaggle them, right? But you won't stop genderqueer from coming up on an 8-year-old's laptop. So I find that odd. But then, this is a corrupt board. So then I realize that that's just how it is. And things need to change in 217 days. Another thing that I found interesting is something that NCAE passed on to the teachers for Black History Month. And they give kid language for suggestions for, inclusiveness. And I'm all about inclusiveness. We should include everyone. That's fine. But there's a difference between inclusion and indoctrination. So to say everybody has the right to choose their own gender by listening to their own heart and mind. Everyone gets to choose if they are a girl or a boy or both or neither or something else, and no one gets to choose for them. My son's teacher has told him something similar, the whole entire class. That's not her job. I've sat here before and said, it's not your job, right? First time I was here, I was very upset about that. And it's the same thing. It's not the teacher's job. I don't understand how we've got to this place where the teacher, feels that it's okay to teach these, ingrained beliefs in school. It's one thing to include, it's another to indoctrinate. Additionally, there is queer affirming, which is working towards a queer affirming network where heteronormative thinking no longer exists. So the NCAE is basically saying that the goal is so that kids do not look and think the mom and the dad, that's normal. That's not normal. They don't want that to be normal. Why? I mean, does anybody know? Y'all don't.
Our next speaker is Peter Bly. Pete Bly.
Good to see y'all. I'm going to pick up where Carrie left off. So now, once we get over the timeline of the TNTP curriculum audit and get over the fact that the report was never released to the public, let's look at the report and its merits, because that's really the most shocking part. TNTP might sound familiar to you. That's the group that would go on to write the Opportunity Myth education article in 2018. If you haven't read it, you don't really need to. You can just look at the TNT report that I just handed the nice gentleman over here. It looks exactly the same. So basically, y'all were part of the propaganda practice that they were going through right then. Do you remember Carrie's last board speech, History Number 1, when she told you that the curriculum evaluation tools of IMET, EQUIP, and Ed Reports were all based on the same checklist? Well, right off the bat, you need to read the fine print in the assessment process of the TNTP report, because they also used the IMET and EQUIP Common Core Standards checklist. So technically, this will be the 4th curriculum evaluation using the exact same metrics. What I just handed was a full copy of the 75-page report, the 46-page proposal summary, the 14-page TNTP proposal summary, and the TNTP contract and 13-page initial proposal. Read the proposal first. The one that mentions the Common Core state standards 46 times. Read it first, then read the rest in succession. Because after we did that, we immediately went back and reread the TNTP proposal. And the first thing that came to our mind was, why? Why did we even hire them? In their proposal, they clearly spell out that they will find wrong with our math and English curriculums. Just because you call them independent does not mean that they didn't have opinions. And it feels like they had a pretty strong opinion and were very deliberate in the path they were trying to prove. You knew you couldn't purchase a math curriculum since the year 2004. Did you really need to pay an independent company $173,881 to tell you that you needed a middle and high school math curriculum in the year 2016? When it's said out loud, does that make sense to you? Because it doesn't to us. You then turned around and used this TNTP report to justify hiring another independent company, Garter Inc., so they could put together a curriculum roadmap to aid in the purchasing of new English and math curriculums, and you paid them $273,000. So, keeping up at home, that is now $500,000, almost $500,000 spent in 2016 just deciding if you need math and English curriculums and how to find new math and English curriculums. After all that money and time and expertise, you ended up putting math workbooks in front of our kids that have zero math learning content in them anyway. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Daniel Grant King.
Good evening, Chair Mahaffey, Superintendent Moore, and board members. I am Mr. Grant King, and currently I'm an educator with Wake County. Also, I serve as the chair with the State Board of Education Subcommittee on our advocacy with our educators and our instructional assistants. This month, can you all hear me? This month, of course, is Autism Awareness Month. And as a special educator in the classroom with our exceptional children, I want to take a moment to emphasize when Autism Awareness Month was first began. According to history, Autism Awareness Month is a long month observed focused on raising awareness about the autism spectrum disorders and what it means to be autistic, regardless of academics, regardless of people and the difficulties and the discrimination that autistic people have faced in society. Of course, my committee and I went over a lot of the advocacy issues regarding all kids and students with disabilities. But we chose this month in particular to focus on Autism Awareness Month. And we also made a declaration in accordance with the 1972 Autistic Society established the National Autistic Children's Week as a part of efforts to educate the community, school districts, and many others about how to support, and not only how to support, but far as instruction in the classroom setting. Also, it gives me great honor and privilege as chair of the advocacy committee that I currently serve. We made a declaration making it very clear to the state as a whole, educators and support staff, along with myself and many others, making it clear and setting the tone that we will continue to advocate for those who have experienced discrimination and bias regardless of gender and regardless of the color of their skin. Also, we have had the privilege of meeting once again this month in preparation for our Teacher Appreciation Week. Of course, it is in May. And of course, with the advocacy work that we do, we decided to recognize one of our very own, one of my colleagues at South Garner High School, none other than Miss Yolanda J. Towns-Lamas. We will be recognizing her on Thursday, May 5th at 1 p.m. And of course, Ms. Johnson-Hostler has been invited to attend that occasion. So it gives me with great hope and reminding us that regardless of outcome, everyone could still achieve. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Grant King. That concludes our public comment section for the evening.
Madam Chair, I move approval of the consent items as listed.
Okay, we have a motion and a second on our consent items. Is there any discussion? All in favor of improving our consent agenda, please signify by a sign of aye. Any opposed, nay. All right, the motion passes. We move on to our action item, which comes from our chief of schools, and it is the instructional calendars for our early college, and that is Glenn Carrozza with support from Tamani Anderson-Powell.
And Paul Domenico.
And Paula I'm sorry, Paul.
Good, thank you.
Good evening, Chairman Haffey, members of the board, Superintendent Moore. This evening, staff is seeking your approval for the 2022-2023 instructional calendars for our early college high schools. I'm joined this evening by Ms. Tamani Anderson-Powell and Mr. Paul Domenico from our Magnet office. If you remember back to March 15th during the board work session, we shared with you the calendars that are uploaded to Assembly this evening. Those are the draft calendars for our early college high schools. I'd like to just share with you that all of these calendars adhere to General Statute 115C-84.2 regarding school calendars. The new early college that's opening in 2022-23, Wake Early College of Information and Biotechnologies, has been conditionally approved by the State Board of Ed. We're seeking final approval by the General Assembly still. They've assured us that they will address this issue during the early portion of their session. However, if necessary, staff will bring this item back to you for additional discussion at a later date. Staff has begun the process to reach out to parents who are assigned to the early college for information and biotechnologies, and should we need to reach out to them again, we will bring them in for further information as necessary. With that, we are seeking approval for the early college calendars for 22-23.
Motion to approve.
Okay, we have a motion from Dr. Martin, a second from Ms. Carter. Is there any discussion? Mr. Croza, do you have a date as to when we expect to hear back from the General Assembly, or when we will inform parents?
So let me just pipe in real quick. So it's a two-step process. DPI recommends to the General Assembly which early colleges. The legislature a few years ago indicated that they would not fund more than 3 a year. DPI has recommended 3, including ours. In our work with the folks at the School Board Association, Superintendent Association, and other places, it's our understanding that this will be an early part of the agenda when the legislature returns in May, because technically you're not an early college until the funding is approved. And so we're adopting a calendar that goes along with Wake Tech, but should something happen with the General Assembly, we may need to come back and discuss that again. And that is what we want to make sure that our parents understand, that it's a conditional approval.
Thank you for that clarification. Any further questions or comments?
Why don't we just note yet another thing where the school systems should be able to decide what is good for the school systems, and this reliance on the General Assembly is not good for education.
Hearing nothing else, all those in favor of adopting these calendars signify by sign of aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
And I'll see.
Now we'll be moving into closed session.
And I'm happy to sit in for Mr. Haggerty and
Thank you,
save
Ms.
you the
Kushner.
reading. And I move we go into closed session to consider confidential personnel information protected under GS 143-318.11 A1 A3 and A6, to consult with the Board of Education attorney and preserve the attorney-client privilege as provided in GS 143-318.11 A3, and to consult with the Board of Education attorney and preserve the attorney-client privilege as provided in GS 143-318.11 A3, which I just said, due to current litigation, JB by and through his parent or guardian, HB 21 EDC 04445, Office of Administrative Hearings.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by sign of aye. Any opposed, nay? We are now in closed session. Thank you.